Thorpe, and I am currently serving as an AmeriCorps with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska is a statewide nonprofit that is dedicated to keeping our natural resources healthy. We do that in a number of ways, including educational programs like the one that we are hosting this afternoon. If you want to know more about Conservation Nebraska, visit our website at neconserve.org or our Facebook page. You can follow us on Facebook, and we also have a YouTube channel that has recordings of many of our programs, including the one that we're doing today. Before I introduce our presenter, Janet Buck, I will cover just a few housekeeping items. Your microphone and cameras are off. Please put your questions or comments in the Q&A or the chat, and we will address them at the end of the program. And we have a short survey that will pop up at the end of the program. We would really appreciate your taking time to complete that because it helps us with funding and planning types of issues. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet Buck, our presenter. Janet has been a registered dietitian since 1996. In that role, she has had various jobs in the community. Most recently, she was the outreach and kitchen coordinator at Matt Talbot. In that position, she was able to pursue two of her big passions, gardening and cooking. She helped to implement a community garden at Matt Talbot, and then was able to work with the participants, teaching them how to prepare and cook the produce from that garden. So I will go ahead and turn the program over to her. And we appreciate all of you being here this afternoon. So, Janet.
Thank you, Peggy. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you all for being here for this important topic. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the scope of food waste is, how big of a problem it is, and then in terms of what individuals can do to help address it in terms of planning and shopping for food, and at home then how they can store and utilize all the food that you purchase. I just think this is amazing. In the US, about 30 to 40% of the food that we produce doesn't get eaten. It's called the world's dumbest environmental problem. People at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, coined that term because while we have 119 billion pounds of food wasted annually in the US, over 44 million people experience food insecurity. It's estimated that if we wasted just 15% less than what we do, we could feed about 25 million of those folks who are food insecure. Food is the single most common material landfilled and composted in the United States. That just was just almost an overwhelming fact when I discovered that. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time figuring out what 119 billion pounds of food is like. But some perspective of that is like if you went to the grocery store, say you're throwing away 33% of what you buy 3 bags of groceries at the grocery store, you go outside and then you just throw one of them in the trash can. We don't do it that blatantly. Of course, we take it home and we put it in our refrigerators and freezers and cupboards, and then we gradually throw it out, but that would be essentially how much we're wasting. It's also, here's another way to conceptualize it. It's like filling the world's largest football stadium to the brim every single day of perfectly good uneaten food. That's here in the United States. That's not worldwide. Food that doesn't get eaten is responsible for 6% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, or methane, basically. It uses 22% of all the fresh water that's used here, 16% of cropland, and somewhere in the 20 to 24% range of what's in our landfills is food. That's just staggering to me that we're spending that much water, that much cropland, for food that just gets thrown out. There's a distinction made between food loss and food waste. Basically, food loss is before food reaches the consumer from harvest to retail, essentially. And it's things like what happens in the fields and in the storage, spoilage that happens to the food, mechanical issues. So like machinery that's not working or weather that impacts food being harvested. There's diseases, insects that can cause spoilage, mold. Transportation is included in that category. In general, that's more prevalent in developing countries. Food waste, on the other hand, is food that's fit for consumption, but is consciously discarded at the retail or consumption phases of food. So an edible item goes uneaten as a result of human action or inaction. And that happens at places like food buffets, catered events, school lunches. Lots of food gets thrown away there. And other group food providers like nursing homes and hospitals, cruise ships. There's orders that are made incorrectly. People buy too much, and they don't eat their leftovers. And also imperfect produce goes in that category. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And this food waste is more prevalent in developed countries in the Western world generally. There are different programs here in Lincoln that are working to address these issues. Produce from the Heart works with UNL Extension here in Lincoln to glean foods from fields and then show people how to use it. FoodNet collects food from donors to help prevent waste of it and provide for those in need. That's mostly perishable foods. The Backyard Farmer Garden accepts excess produce from gardens to distribute to those in need. And then other charities such as Matt Talbot Kitchen and Outreach, the Salvation Army, Catholic Social Services also accept excess produce for distribution. There was a law passed called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act in 1996 to help protect businesses and consumers from liability when they donate food in good faith to a nonprofit. So because people used to be concerned more if they donated food and someone would get ill or something that they might be liable. So that was passed to address that. At the national level, there are food recovery efforts. These are a couple of them. The DC Central Kitchen in Washington, DC has been recovering food waste and converting it into meals for hungry and at-risk families since 1989. And they also provide culinary training to those who are facing barriers to employment. Feeding America is another great and a big program that works to rescue food, provide access to it for people who might not be able to get to where they have the food. They respond in disasters, and they also conduct research as to why people and communities face hunger, because there are sometimes system-wide barriers to people accessing food. I mentioned this a little bit, but besides the obvious ethical reason of not feeding hungry people with food that's getting wasted, there are economic, environmental, and social reasons to not waste food. We're wasting water, energy, and resources. The Natural Resources Defense Council estimates that an average family of 4 would save about $1,800 a year if they didn't throw away so much food. And, we already talked a little bit about the cropland, the water supply, the amount of waste that's going to landfills. We'd also decrease fertilizer use, pesticide use, farm labor, fuel, and transportation are also spent to grow food that's just wasted. This graph kind of shows where surplus food that gets wasted occurs across the supply chain. Farms account for like 17% of food that gets, that food loss basically there, 15% in manufacturing, 20% in consumer-facing businesses, and that's shown below, like in retail, grocery stores, different kinds of restaurants, and other food service. But what's, again, just amazing to me is that 48% of the food, about 48% of the food that gets wasted is from people's homes. And since that is where the majority of the waste happens and where most of us can have an impact, that's what I'm going to concentrate on for the rest of this presentation. The USDA and U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency started collaborating in 2015 and added the FDA in 2018 to conduct a U.S. food waste challenge. And what their goal was is to lead a fundamental shift in how we think about and manage food and food waste in this country. Their overall goal was to hopefully to decrease food waste by half from 2015 to 2030. Not sure how that's going, but some research I saw shows that it's not really, that we're throwing away more food than ever, actually, in recent years. The EPA has on their website, if you wanted to look it up, it's called Food Too Good to Waste, what they call a waste audit. Because a lot of us we're not even aware of how much food we throw away on a weekly basis. So they suggest that you collect it, put it in a bag. If you think it's going to get bad, put it in the freezer, and then start to notice the reasons you throw the food away and what form was the wasted food in. Are you throwing away fresh produce, or are you throwing away dishes that you've already made up? Just didn't get around to eating them, or you're tired of them. Kind of do a little assessment to figure out why are you throwing away this food. And I think it's also amazing to figure out how much you actually are throwing away. So what can you do about it? Well, one of the big steps is to start planning. Some quick ideas for planning your menus are use meals you regularly make. Don't necessarily set off to make a bunch of exotic menus or recipes that your family won't eat or that you won't prepare. And ask yourself, what do you have in your kitchen, not what do you want to eat today? And this term, shop your kitchen first, is kind of a good one to keep in mind, because you want to check in your refrigerator, your freezer, and your pantry and see what you have there. And I'm going to talk about a principle called first in, first out in a little bit. So hopefully your older foods will be towards the front of these locations. Use portion planners. Say you're feeding a family of 5. How much produce do you actually need to buy for the recipes that you're going to make? And there are lots of those online. I didn't list them, but you can easily look them up yourself online if you're interested. Have your kitchen essentials on hand. One of the books that I read in researching this program talked about basic cooking staples, hero condiments, and meal rounders. And she talked about staples being things like different types of oils and vinegars, soy sauce, mayonnaise, mustard, onions, garlic, canned diced tomatoes, honey, your crushed chilies, different herbs and spices. Condiments being to help to enhance the flavor of whatever you're making, things like maple syrup, hot sauce, barbecue sauce, lemon juice, soup bouillon, dried onions, Parmesan cheese, sun-dried tomatoes, raisins, nuts, pickles. And then rounders being what the more substantial part of the dishes or the foods that you're going to make. Have eggs on hand. Have at least one grain like rice or pasta or quinoa or couscous, whatever your family likes. Have canned dried beans for convenience. Have frozen vegetables, again, for convenience. And either have some kind of frozen meat, fish, or a package of tofu for your protein. So you have those always on hand. And then have your building blocks. 2 types of protein, 1 or 2 grains, and a vegetable medley. Again, easy if you keep things in your freezer. Some other ideas for planning menus is think double duty. Incorporate the ingredients that you are preparing into multiple meals. Alice Hinneman, who was here at University of Nebraska Extension, has a whole program of cook once, eat twice. And just an idea of one of her ideas was to cook enough rice on one night that you can use it for 2 times. And the first night you would have it with ground beef, tomatoes, Italian seasonings to make a dish. And then what you've set aside for the second night, use for fried rice. Because when you make fried rice, it wants the rice to be cool anyway, be cold anyway. Schedule in a lazy night. A lot of people don't do that, but we get home from work, we get home from school, we intended to make whatever, spaghetti that night, but we're too tired. Schedule that in. Have food that have some leftovers, have some things you've frozen in the freezer so you can just pull those out. So that's something that we don't do, is scheduling in lazy nights or nights that we're going to go out to eat. Another, and I don't have it on my list, but another idea is to make a leftover night. Plan a leftover night at with your family, where you go through the refrigerator and find foods that you have and put those all out, and those get eaten on that night, and just plan it in. Another suggestion is to use your fresh foods first. So things that are going to be perishable, use those first, so they don't go bad. Use the frozen ingredients. Cook in batches and freeze. That's easy to do with soups and casseroles. Use a meal planner. I've got some listed here that I'll show you in a minute. And make a list or two before you go to the store. They suggest making one grocery list with the items you're going to need for the coming week, and that you've used your meal planner or decided what you're going to make. And then the second list could be for staples, and when you're running low on them, put them on a staples list, and you could wait and buy those till they're on sale and then keep enough on hand for several months. Okay, and these are some sources that I found to help you in planning. They have different levels of difficulty and different degrees of helpfulness, I discovered. The USDA Healthy Eating on a Budget is menu ideas. It doesn't really give you recipes, it doesn't give you how to make various foods from items that you have, but it does give you good ideas for menus. And looking at these recipe finder databases, I looked at several of these. I really like Gumbo. It's from Great Britain. So it's written in metric. I can't remember if it has the conversion to English measurements, but anyway, you would have to consider that. But you can put in whatever ingredients you have on hand that you want to use and either make it optional or mandatory, and then search for a recipe. And it's amazing the recipes that it comes up with that are using ingredients that you already have on hand. So I really like that, and I've started using that at home myself all the time. Another interesting one is called Eat Your Books, where you can add in the cookbooks that you have. It has like 10,000 in its database, and then it searches for recipes in those cookbooks based on the ingredients that you tell it that you have. How you shop is the single most important factor in how much food you will waste. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. So some tips to help you waste less when you get the food home by buying only what you need at the grocery store. Stick to the list that you made. Use a basket instead of a cart, because you're not so likely to fill up a basket with more food than you can use. Pay in cash, because again, that gives you some idea of how much food you're actually purchasing. This one was interesting. Use headphones, because evidently the music in grocery stores is deliberately being played to cause you to linger longer in the grocery store, which I found really interesting. So that was a suggestion. If you find yourself buying more than you need, take a water bottle. I mean, or go better, go when you're not hungry. So you're not buying things just because you're hungry. Don't take your children. Kids tend to be a huge distraction and to cause you to buy more than you intended to. I did see an interesting suggestion on Facebook one time where this mother let her kids pick items at the grocery store to give to children in need. So that gives them something to do and hopefully distracts them from bugging you to buy more than you would actually use realistically. Thought that was a great idea. Okay, lots of grocery stores have the buy one, get one free or get one half price or whatever with a discount. And then that makes people buy more than they really can use. So you could ask the grocery store if you could pick up the second item later, they keep it there, or buy it later at the sale price. There was discussion in some of the books that I read about that is really a policy that promotes food waste. It might be better to have items that people aren't buying or that the store needs to take out of inventory to have it be on sale instead of saying buy one, get one. So it's an interesting thought. You may be able to buy just by the amount you need at the sale price. So if the sale says you buy 10 for $10 of, say, cartons of yogurt, you might be able to buy 3 cartons for $3. And that's really what you would eat before the yogurt would get bad. Don't assume that items at the end of the aisles are good deals. They may not be. I've sometimes walked onto the aisle and see that what they have on the end cap is really not any less than what it is there on the shelf. So if you have a smaller family, or it's just yourself, or you just don't need the size of meat that's being sold, ask them at the meat counter or at the deli if they can cut the meat into portion sizes that your family would use, or cut it into portion sizes that you would use if you need to buy the whole piece and then freeze when you get home the excess amount. Another suggestion is to buy from the bulk area so that you can purchase only the amount that you need. And likewise, if a store has a salad bar and you only need small amounts of vegetables or fruit, produce, ask if or buy it from there instead of buying it in a large container that you won't use before it goes bad. If you're buying produce and the store uses misters, you want to shake all the excess water off of your produce before you get it home, because damp produce is going to spoil quicker than drier. And most grocery stores aren't designed to put this one into effect, but it's suggesting to buy perishables and frozen foods last so that they spend a minimum amount of time at room temperature. Most perishables, most produce is at the entrance to the store, but you could backtrack if you wanted to do that. I think probably not such a huge deal if the store is air conditioned, but a bigger issue is putting groceries in a hot car and then going and running other errands. That's going to make the spoilage rate go faster of your food. So take it right home or bring a cooler when you go to the grocery store and it's hot outside. Put your groceries away when you get home. Don't let them sit out there for a couple hours. And if it's possible, go to farmers markets and shop there, because that produce is going to be fresher and more likely to last longer. Okay, this next this topic, I think there is so much confusion about, is food labels. there's just so many different kinds of food labels out there. And these are just some of them. Sell by, the use by, the freshest by, the best before, the best if used by, the expires on. Freeze by is a little bit different, but all of those are out there, and I'm going to talk about those more in a minute. Now, I'm also going to say that some foods have the date of manufacture or packing on the foods, and some things such as yeast and baking soda and baking powder actually do have expiration dates, and after that they may not function as desired. You can actually check for yeast yourself by putting a teaspoon of sugar in some water and putting the yeast in to see if it's bubbles, see if it's still alive. So you can actually check that too and see if it's still good. But I want to really emphasize that none of these terms are federally mandated except the use by labeling on infant formula. And that's there because if an infant is drinking infant formula, that's their sole source of nutrition. And if the formula is old, it's possible that some of the nutrients in it have deteriorated. And so it would not be promoting the best growth in the child. So you do need to dispose of infant formula that's gone past its expiration date. And that actually also is the only thing that is mandated, is that use by coating on infant formula, not on any other kind of food. Sell by is used for the store's inventory management. That's basically why it's there. It's nothing to do, once again, with safety. The use by, the freshest by, the expires on, all of those sorts of terms are all guidelines that food manufacturers have developed to help guide consumers about how long the best quality of the food lasts. And the food may remain good for days, weeks, even months, sometimes even years after the date that's on the package or the container. So not a safety issue at all, only quality. And the manufacturer decides whether to label the food at all. So it's totally up to the manufacturer, and the term that they decide to use is up to them. We don't even know what it means for sure. They could use lab tests, they could use consumer taste tests, they could look at literature values or even sales data. They can use whatever they want to decide whatever date they want to put on there. And maybe the taste or the color changes a little, but and particularly for canned foods, there's really an indefinite period of time that that'll be good. As long as there's no hole or kind of rupture in the can, that food was heat processed, so all the microorganisms are killed and it's sealed. So there's nothing in there that can cause anything that will be harmful to you. And as a matter of fact, if there's food is actually unsafe and would cause food poisoning, it may not have any undesirable attributes. It may not taste bad. It may not smell bad. It may not look bad. And food poisoning is related to microorganisms being in the food that can make you sick. And that's related to unsafe processing, handling, or storage of the food. So if they didn't heat it hot enough, somebody, and this wouldn't happen with canned foods, but somebody handled something and contaminated it or stored it, and a bacteria or virus or fungus got into it. Back before we had labeling on foods, people used their senses to tell if a food was bad. They smelled it, they looked at it, they tasted it. So those are still things that I would recommend you do. You know, if it smells bad, if it looks bad, if it tastes bad, then it's probably not good for you. So then you would dispose of it. But using those dates is really causing a lot of food wastage that's not necessary. Now, that being said, if you're buying unprocessed foods such as deli meats or unpasteurized cheeses or smoked seafood, you have sandwiches made from any of these ingredients, you would want to dispose of them by the recommended expiration dates, because there's a high risk of food poisoning called listeria, caused by a microorganism called Listeria monocytogenes. So, okay. Yes, so I just want to emphasize that food labeling is not it's not a safety issue, and lots and lots and lots of food gets thrown away because people don't understand that. Interestingly, there's been a Food Date Labeling Act that was originally introduced in Congress in 2016, and in 2021, and again last year. As far as I could find, it has not been passed into law. Not sure why, because it seems to make a lot of sense, because the goal of it is to reduce confusion regarding food labeling, and they would eliminate all those other terms, and they would only have used by and best if used by. Those would be the only two terms, and the used by would go on infant formulas and food, in which case you should discard it after the date that's on there. And the best if used by would indicate the best quality would be before that date, however they determine that. And again, it's not a safety issue. So hopefully this law will become, this bill will become law, and people will have a lot more clarity and assistance with what do those labels mean. Okay, buying seconds. Seconds are usually considered food that maybe it was already prepared and didn't get sold, or there's produce rescue, like with this Hungry Harvest. Foods that maybe ugly foods, I'll talk more about that in a second here, but might have blemish, might not look exactly right, have a little bit of deformity in it, that's perfectly edible. So there's several different programs throughout the country that are doing this and trying to recycle, basically, or get the food used that's already been prepared, or produce that's perfectly good. Walmart offers specific brands of bagged seconds, like Spugley's potatoes and I'm Perfect apples. So Spugley's potatoes have little knobs on them, or maybe misshapen a little bit. Same thing with the I'm Perfect, which is a play on imperfect apples. So again, they may have little knobs or little bumps or a blemish on the skin or something. Perfectly edible, perfectly good. So I could not find that here in Lincoln, though, when I called to the Walmarts. I don't know if they're selling these items or not. It'd be good if they were. And then they also salvage eggs from cartons where one or two, a couple of them broke. And in 2015, which is the last date I found any information for, they salvaged 37 million eggs for resale this way. Seems sort of like a no-brainer to me that they should be doing this. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some storage principles and things you can do to store your food to help it to last longer. In general, if it's hot, there's high light, high humidity, and the presence of ethylene gas, your food's not going to last as long, depending on what kind it is. You can freeze, can, or dry excess food. If you have leftovers, put them into a sealable container. Suggest using a clear container. Make sure you label them. I saw a fair amount of discussion about leftovers that people bring home from restaurants, that those takeout containers are not airtight, so food doesn't really stay very fresh in those. So you might want to move it from the container that the restaurant gives you and put it in something more airtight. Or better yet, take your own to the restaurant and use that. If you have food that needs to be refrigerated, the refrigerator saves food best between 34 and 41 degrees. Get a thermometer if you don't have one. Make sure it's at the right temperature. The warmest part of the refrigerator is the door. The coldest part is the back on the bottom shelf. So if you think about it, would you want to keep your eggs on the door of the refrigerator? Even though there are all those nice little indentations there, it's really not the best place to store your eggs. It's recommended that you keep them in the original carton and in the center of the fridge to hold in moisture. And milk, because the back bottom shelf is coldest, that's where you should store it. If you have packaged raw meat, you want to put it on a tray or a plate and on the bottom shelf so that the juices don't drip onto some produce that might not get cooked and contaminate it. Produce can go into the crisper drawers, and if you've noticed, all the refrigerators I've ever had, there are little levers on the crisper drawers, and if you open the levers, more of the liquid, the moisture in there evaporates out, so you have less humidity in there. If you close the little lever, then more of that moisture is kept in there, and there's a higher humidity in the jar. And there are also recommendations of foods that should be kept in either higher or low humidity, and even in the crisper or not in the crisper. So some produce is recommended to be kept in it, some not. And I didn't mention yet, but greens are the category of produce that's wasted the most. All of it should be kept in high humidity crisper drawer, and the sturdier greens like kale, cabbage, collards, woody herbs such as rosemary and thyme, you want to wrap them in plastic, put them in the drawer. Medium greens like chard, bok choy, mustard, radicchio, endive, you want to trim and remove any wilted ends, and then you want to wrap them in a towel or some kind of cloth before you put them in the plastic bag and store in the crisper. And then your tender greens like lettuce, spinach, arugula, you want to wash and dry them, store them in the container that you got them in, or another plastic container, and again wrapped in a towel. The exception to that is iceberg lettuce that you want to keep whole and wrapped in plastic. So just some ideas for helping things store longer. Some produce should go in the refrigerator: berries, cherries, grapes, mushrooms, all your vegetables, your cut melon. Some you ripen. It's recommended you ripen them at room temperature out of direct sunlight and then move them into the refrigerator. Avocados, kiwi, pears, other stone fruits, other than cherries, which should always be in the fridge, but things like peaches, apricots, those sorts of foods. Some produce you can store at room temperature in low light, and some in a brighter light, as long as it's indirect. I'm not going to read all those to you, but all your onion family and your potatoes, sweet potatoes, can be stored at room temperature, with the exception that you don't want to store garlic or onions with potatoes because they can hasten the sprouting of potatoes and them going bad. Other produce can be stored at room temperature in a brighter indirect light. Most people know bananas, tomatoes, citrus, mangoes, those sorts of things can be stored at room temperature. Ethylene is a gas that fruits and vegetables produce naturally that causes them to ripen. And there are some items some produce that produces high amounts of ethylene, and that's why they ripen at room temperature, like avocados and bananas, but also apples, guavas, passion fruit, pears. And then these fruits and vegetables are sensitive to ethylene, so you don't really want to store those with apples or bananas because they're going to go bad quicker when, say, you put them with avocados. They're going to cause them to go bad. So it's recommended that you store them separately. You can store herbs by just the tender herbs like basil, cilantro, chervil, mint, parsley, sorrel. You can put them in a glass of water on the counter, just like a cut flowers. Unless you're not going to use them within 4 days or it's hotter than 80 degrees out, then you can put the glass with the herbs in the refrigerator and they'll last longer that way. Except you don't want to do that with basil because it'll turn black if it gets cold. So you can freeze whole stems of herbs for up to a month. Usually you take the herbs off of the stems, put them in an ice cube tray, fill it with water, and then freeze the cubes. And then you can take those cubes out and put it into, say, soups or stews that you're making, and the herbs are right there and fresh, or like fresh. You can dry them. Usually woody herbs like oregano, rosemary, sage, and thyme work better that way, but you can dry them and save them indefinitely then. Here's just some more ideas for foods that last indefinitely. Honey, sugar, your dried lentils, basically dried beans of all sorts, white rice, cornstarch, and agar, salt, tea bags, and coffee. Dried beans, dried pasta, corn syrup, flavoring, extract, leaveners. I kind of put those in 2 places, but those are things that can be stored indefinitely too. Some that are better in the refrigerator are brown rice, your whole grains, your whole wheat pasta, because they have the whole, the complete grain in them, and the germ can get rancid quicker, so you're better off storing them at a cooler temperature so that rancidity doesn't happen as quickly. And maple syrup is better in the refrigerator. You can also freeze it, actually. One of the books that I used for this presentation was called the Waste-Free Kitchen Handbook, and it has a whole section on the proper storage of foods to maintain the best quality. And many university extension specialists have information about how to safely store foods and for what length of time. The University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension has a guide called Food Storage that you can look up. You can store flour in an airtight container at less than 70 degrees. If you refrigerate it, you get an extra 6 months of shelf life. If you freeze it, you can keep it for 12 months or longer before it would go bad. I've saved some for longer than a year, I know, and it's been good still. Canned goods, once you open them, you want to put them in an airtight container. You can also freeze those foods as well. And I talked a little bit about the FIFO method, the first in, first out method. You want to have your older foods, bring your older foods to the front of your cupboards or your refrigerator so that you don't forget about it, and that gets used before the newer foods. So kind of a rotation system that they use in food service a lot. If you have to separate an egg, I actually didn't know this till I started doing this presentation, but you're going to use maybe the egg yolks. You want to keep them for future use in sweetened baked goods. You can stir a ratio of 3/4 teaspoon of corn syrup to 4 yolks and freeze it in little 1 tablespoon dollops in ice cube trays. And 1 tablespoon would be like a yolk when you take it out to use it. If you're going to use it in savory foods, you can put 1/4 teaspoon of salt and gently mix it up before you freeze it with each egg yolk. Egg whites can be frozen in ice cube trays. If you're going to whip them, they last for 4 months, or other cooking, they last for a year. Hard cooked eggs last a week in the fridge. You can use your fried or scrambled eggs in egg salad. You can use scrambled ones, combine them with cheese and salsa and add tortilla to make a breakfast burrito. And this section has several ideas about how to use maybe when food's getting to the end of its shelf life. like dairy and sour milk or yogurt. And this means if it's just starting to smell bad, it's not all curdled or anything, but you can use it in oatmeal, you can thicken soups and stews with it, you can tenderize raw chicken and meats and use it in place of egg when you're breading things. Same with yogurt. You can make your own cheese, which I've been doing since I read about this. You can make fromage forte, which is a spread made from little pieces of leftover cheese mixed with white wine, garlic, and herbs. Have not made that, but it sounds good. You can grill cheese with it. You can make bread pudding, which also can make use of dried bread. You can use it in bake items like all of these listed here are used in place of buttermilk, actually. The making the cheese is really fun. You can use your sour milk, you know, it smells bad, but it's not all curdly, to make like a soft cheese similar to feta. If you had a half a gallon of it, you heat it to boiling, you add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar to it, then you pull the pan from the heat and stir until the curds and whey begin to separate, which is really fun to watch. And then you can put it into a cheesecloth lined colander, squeeze out the excess moisture, and that whey can also be used in cooking and baking. And then you can eat the soft cheese that you've made this way, kind of like an Indian paneer or Latin American queso fresco. I've used it in casseroles, and it's really good to use it that way. You can make it into a cottage cheese by adding salt and some milk or cream to it. Okay, if you have, you know, some meats or other protein, use it in a soup or a stew, add it to a baked potato, make it into a salad like tuna salad, top a salad with it. Make like ham fritters, which I have the recipe in here. Make a bean dip, make a cream cheese dip. And that also can use your veggies, your herbs, condiments. Cook it with eggs to make a strata or casserole, a quiche, a frittata, scramble it. Different ways to use your meat up or your protein. Fruit can be made into smoothies, make it into a chutney or into a slaw. You can make a fruit leather, which involves peeling and cooking the fruit, pureeing it, then putting it on a cookie sheet at 170, spreading it out, let it dehydrate for 6 to 7 hours. Easy way to make fruit that you might not want to just eat, but use the fruit. You might not want to just eat it, but you can make something with it. You can make a dip with it. You can can, freeze, or dry fruit. You want to blanch fruit before freezing it to deactivate the enzymes that would cause it to keep on ripening. You can use a dehydrator or dry it in an oven. Usually you want to cut your fruit into like 1/4-inch rings, toss it with lemon juice, and put it in an oven, different temperatures for different times. If it's at 140, you would do it for 6 hours. If it's at 250, you would bake for 3 hours. Vegetables, again, you can can them, you freeze them, you can dry them, you can use them in omelets, quiches, frittatas, scrambled eggs, or egg casseroles. Use them to stuff baked potatoes. Make a power bowl with beans or meat, with rice, cheese, and or a sauce. Used to make soup stock, use it in soup, stews, and stir fries. Add it to a dip. Roast or saute things that are getting wilty. Make a slaw or chutney from doopy vegetables. And I have included a recipe for egg muffin cups that use little bits and pieces of vegetables that you may have left. Starches, if you've got bread, you can make crumbs, you can make croutons, you can make French toast, you can make crostini from small slices of toasted bread. Papa al pomodoro is an Italian tomato soup with bread added to it. You can use bread, make bread pudding. Also can use milk that might be at the end of its shelf life. You can make stuffing. You can make panzanella, which is an Italian salad using bread cubes, tomatoes, onions, sometimes some other things. A panade, roasted tomatoes with bread and cheese, and then a vegetable panade, which is like a dressing using bread, vegetables, and cheese. So all things that might be going bad. I have the recipe for that, and an egg strata included here too. Rice can be added to chili or tacos. You can use it as a bed for putting your leftover chili or your roasted vegetables in. You can use it to stuff peppers or squash. You can make a power bowl again using the rice. You can make fried rice with it, which actually is quite a good use for it. Pasta, again, you can use it as a bed to put leftovers in. You can make an empty the fridge chicken vegetable soup with egg noodles that you have and uses vegetables and chicken. That recipe is in the packet that I have here. I never had thought about this, but you can use cookie crumbs or cereals to make a pie crust. I have a recipe for that too. Oh, interesting too. You can use cooking liquids or liquids that foods are stored in and use them for cooking. One of the most interesting ones that I've been making is aquafaba. That's the liquid from cooking legumes that has a lot of starch in it still. So you can whip it, and 3 tablespoons can replace a large egg in recipes. I have the recipe for how to make aquafaba fluff and actually brownies made from it, which was interesting, really good. You can use juice from canned corn or tomatoes and lentil liquid. You can use corn juice to make chowder and polenta, tomato juice in place of some of the vinegar in dressings. You can freeze it to make ice cubes for Bloody Marys. You can dilute it and cook rice for Mexican rice or red rice and beans. You can use lentil liquid in mushroom risotto or curried noodles, add it to gazpacho. And then cheese brine can actually be used with spices for marinating meats. So what I found is that there's a huge amount of information out there for whole cookbooks written on how to use leftover foods, pieces of food that might be getting to the end of its lifespan. So lots and lots of interesting things to try. So in summary, what we talked about today is what a big problem food waste actually is, both or socially, economically, and environmentally. It's the largest for homes are where the largest percentage of food waste comes from. And what we can do about it is to be mindful in planning and shopping and storing and using foods. Don't rely on food labels so much. Use your own senses to tell whether food is bad. And I think another important thing is get that word out there. Tell your family, your friends, your neighbors about what an issue this is and some things that they can do to help address it. So thank you. And I believe the recipes, we can send those out if you're interested in seeing some of those. And I'm open to any questions that anyone might have at this point. Peggy's still muted.
Can you believe, I'm sorry. I was muted apparently, but I wanted to say that was an excellent presentation with a lot of really practical information. I know that I learned a lot, and I'm sure other people did as well. And you can put your questions in the Q&A would be the best place probably if anybody has any. Sorry about being muted there. Don't see any questions. Okay, we've got a short survey, and we would really appreciate your taking the time to fill that out. It does help us in terms of future planning and funding. Some of the grants that we have require that we do the survey. So we would appreciate that. We had to have some technical thing go wrong, so I'm glad it was me. We'll give you just a few minutes to do that. If people do want copies of the recipes, they could contact Conservation Nebraska, and we will get those out to you. Do you want to describe a little bit, or the recipes using leftover food and food that might expire, correct? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's food that's kind of to the end of its lifespan, and how can you use the bean liquid in a can of beans to make a whipped, kind of like an egg white substitute to use in foods, and how to use dried bread, how to use milk. That's the recipe for the cheese is in there. So, which that's actually kind of fun to do when you have some milk that's starting to not taste too great. You can make your own little cheese make your own cheese out of it and use it. So, and I always hated that. Get halfway through a gallon of milk and it starts to not taste so good, so you don't want to drink it. But this way,
yes, this was really practical, helpful information.
thank you.
Okay, well, people are completing the survey. I might mention that we do have a number of really interesting programs coming up. If you check out our Facebook page, you can see what those are. There's several. We have really several programs in February and March and even in January. There's one tomorrow night, I believe, on how climate change impacts health, which should be very interesting. Okay, well, maybe I have a question here. Okay, does the fat content of milk matter to make cheese?
No. No, I've made it with 1% milk. I don't know if I've ever done it with skim milk, but you can do it with full fat. It's just going to affect the amount of fat that's in the finished cheese.
Okay. That was a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we appreciate everybody attending. And especially thanks to you, Janet.
You're welcome.
For putting it together. It was I know you did a lot of research and it was very helpful information. If we don't have any more questions, I think we'll go ahead and